Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Nicole Quinn, and I'm here with Dr. Daylon James, co host of the Stem Cell podcast. Welcome to the Lab Coats and Life podcast, where we help scientists thrive. The Lab Coats and Life podcast is brought to you by STEMCELL Technologies, a global biotechnology company supporting life sciences research and fostering communication and collaboration in science. If you enjoy the Lab Coats and Life podcast, rate us and leave a review. You can also suggest ideas or recommend guests for new episodes. Today, we have Dr. Brandon Stell on the podcast. Brandon is a research scientist at the National Center of Scientific Research in Paris. His team studies a part of the brain called the cerebellum and how it processes sensory information encountered during movement to adapt behaviors to a changing environment. In 2012, Brendan co-founded the website PubPeer.com to provide scientists with a forum to discuss the published research literature. PubPeer has grown to be one of the leading sites for scientific discussion, with a dedicated community of users who have helped strengthen the scientific record by exposing and correcting its weaknesses. But before we get to that, would you like to organize a journal club but aren't sure where to start? Visit www.stemcell.com/journal club to find free downloadable checklists and templates, including an attendance sheet, preparation checklist, presenter evaluation form template, and more. Daylon, how are you doing today? How's New York?
New York is great. Getting chilly here around this time of year, but it's always a delight to join you virtually, Nicole. And today, as you'll hear very soon, we have a real podcast voice, not just for, his contribution to science, but I mean, literally got a booming podcast voice that's highly resonant. It's going to be a joy for us all to listen to.
Well, Brendan, with that introduction, welcome to Lab Coats and Life. How is everything in Paris today?
Paris is good. Like in New York, the weather's getting a little bit chilly. I have to say that's the first time I've ever been complimented on my voice. So thank you very much, Daylon.
You deserve it.
And I'm happy to be here. Thank you guys for the invitation.
Let's start with a general overview. So what is PubPeer and what motivated you to start it?
Before we begin, I'd just like to say that the views that I'm representing today are mine alone and not anybody else's. And I'm here today talking to you guys, but I run the site with Boris Barber, who's a scientist here in Paris with me, a colleague, and one of my really good friends. So PubPeer, I got the motivation for PubPeer when I was an undergrad and a grad student attending journal clubs, scientific discussions about articles, and always had the impression that in these journal clubs, we were really giving the articles a hard time. And that if the authors were there, they could help us clarify some of these issues that we thought we found in the article. And so I was always surprised that there just wasn't a discussion board for articles. And after talking about it a long time with colleagues over the years, finally met people that had the technical capability to do it and put together just a discussion board. And so that's what PubPeer is. It's a discussion board centered on scientific articles, and any article with a DOI or some kind of serial number to identify the article can be commented on PubPeer.
Yeah, I mean I'm glad that you simplified it there, but it's a big deal, right? I mean, that's like talking about how like chat rooms, right? In the beginning of the internet, there were these fora, but they've evolved, and so has PubPeer to be like a major forum for all kinds of discussion. And I think this is great. It's great to have you on the show for this forum that we're speaking to here on the Lab Coats and Life podcast, which is about mentorship. And it's about this, I guess, new generation of scientists in training, and how the landscape that they're operating within is very different from the one that we came up in, or many of us came up in. And I think PubPeer is a huge part of that, a huge facet of that. And it's a great counterpoint, I think, within this series, the Lab Coats and Life podcast, to a previous episode that we had with Richard Sever, who's the founder of BioArchive. Here we're in like a similar vein in terms of like the public forum idea, but PubPeer is a whole different animal, right? To quote the website, the overarching goal of the foundation is to improve the quality of scientific research by enabling innovative approaches for community
So I think that one of the biggest issues facing science right now is evaluation of scientists and science based on journal name. So our careers, young careers, even advanced careers, are really the currency of careers in science is the journal, and specifically the journal name. And this has caused a lot of different issues in publishing, right? And for scientists, I mean, by focusing on journal name, we are kind of captured by non-open access, or we're promoting non-open access publishing, because we have to publish, Science, Nature, Cell. These are not open access journals by default, and we're kind of incentivized to publish in those different journals. And so that also, by focusing on journal name, we're also impeding the adaptation of advances in publishing. There are all new cool ways of publishing. We're not stuck with the PDF anymore. We could be using, the data could be published with the article. It could be interactive. We're not doing any of that, probably because we're stuck to evaluating articles based on journal name, and the journals themselves, those journals are not innovating this type of thing. And finally, focusing on journal name incentivizes questionable research. There's really an incentive to young scientists focusing on their career, or one thing that comes across to them when they're doing research is thinking about their future career. And when you're collecting data and you see that there are these outlier data, may not make it look so great for publishing in Nature or Science, there's just an incentive to kind of, not see those things and make the data look better for these higher impact factor journals. And so your question was, what has PubPeer contributed to this? And I think that this is the goal of the website, is having these conversations about the data in the article puts the focus back on the data and off of the journal name. And I think that PubPeer has made a lot of progress in that over the last 12 years in really, focusing on the data within an article. Sorry, it's a long answer to a simple question.
No, it was a great answer to a complicated question, I think. And I can hear sort of three layers of accountability there. You're saying, the brand of these journals, the Cell, Nature, Science journals, that we all know that makes or breaks a career. So if you get a publication in Nature, your path forward is a lot smoother. So you end up with, as you mentioned, scientists who might massage or just manipulate their scientific story into a situation where that it might be more likely to be accepted by one of those journals. You also have the acceptance of anything that's in one of those journals is accepted as truth and as excellent science. It's a Nature paper. It must be perfect. And then you also have this other thing that's at play where if you're published in Nature, Cell, Science once, you're more likely to be published in Nature, Cell, Science again. And because, you've got that tied to your name. And I think we all know that you're not just as likely to have another, maybe you are, because those are the big funded labs and you've got a little bit more resources once you get on that path. But we shouldn't just be accepting, good science comes after good science comes after good science. And so can you, I'm trying to find the question in all of that, but do you agree with sort of those three ways that things can kind of fall apart when we lean on those journals so much? And also, can you think of any specific examples of when PubPeer might have broken something like that down? And I don't want to shame anyone or really get deep into the weeds here, but some win that you can think of where it's like, actually, yeah, we made sure the scientific record was accurate here. We found whether it was intentional misconduct or something that kind of slipped through the cracks on it was accidental, or just had a deeper conversation about something that that the scientific community realized that more research needed to be done before we accepted something as, final.
So I really hesitate to talk about specific cases. I don't want to give the impression that that we're focused on these specific cases. But I think in general, PubPeer is doing a great job at, like I said, just putting focus back on the content in the article. And I think that this puts the evaluation back into the hands of the community. And I think that if there was more and more uptake of this usage of this sort of evaluation, then evaluators, selection committees would be using this sort of information. Just like, when I pick a restaurant or something, I read the online reviews. Maybe I don't read all of them. I read the best reviews, I read the worst reviews, but that's because it's kind of a subjective review. On a PubPeer review, it's really based on science. And often, if I'm reading the PubPeer thread, it's because it's an article that I'm interested in, and I'm probably going to read all the details in that. And I think a selection committee, if we, scientists came together and provided them with this other layer of assessment, they would happily use it instead of using journal name as their evaluation criteria. And I think, to answer your question is, I think PubPeer's, we still have a long ways to go, but PubPeer has done a respectable job of focusing that information or providing that evaluation layer. And when I say PubPeer, this isn't me. This is like the users, like PubPeer has built a really nice community of dedicated users who are making these comments. It's really impressive, the comments that are, the dedication that the users have for evaluating science, providing that knowledge for other people.
Yes, it is. I mean, the users deserve a lot of credit. I think you deserve a ton of credit too for nucleating it. You and your peers who put this together initially. I think it was a great idea that a lot of people had, and that you acted on, and it's grown from there. And I'm going to be honest and frank with you, and I'm sure I'm not alone. You've heard it a million times. I mean, a lot of people, I think, or at least I can speak for myself. I was introduced to PubPeer because it was like, oh snap, XYZ on PubPeer got called out, right? So there is that whole idea of the drama of it. But as you're talking about it, like that is so, I don't want to say limiting, but that is, I think, that is, there's so much more beyond that in the intent and in the design and in the opportunity as you're describing it there. It's like Yelp, right? I mean, and I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of Yelp. As you said, it's subjective. I see some on Yelp, it's almost like, okay, let's avoid that. I'll go to New York Magazine first. But again, you go to New York Magazine because they have some expertise, and you mentioned that the users there, they're talking about the science in granular detail and vetting it. And that is, I think, the great benefit and the great opportunity is not to, be slapping people on the wrist, but to have this evergreen forum for discussing science and reframing it as we move through time, right? Because as we talked about, there's the big investigators, there's the big labs that get the big papers, but there's also the trends in science, right? And I mean, sometimes you need 10 years of remove, like say with COVID, to realize that maybe we shouldn't have been publishing everything. But at the time, it was really important. So that evergreen form for review, I think, is a key element that maybe people are missing in focusing on that scientific misconduct element of PubPeer. But I think the winds are changing, right? I think that there's recognition now that PubPeer does have this additional value. And, today, no coincidence, a very big day for PubPeer because you're showcased on the Lab Coats and Life podcast. But also, just this morning, it was announced that PubPeer had been awarded this Einstein Foundation Award for promoting quality in research. What an amazing honor. I mean, a significant sum of money that'll certainly be useful in supporting operations at PubPeer. But really the principle behind this award, I think, is the key and the recognition of it. along with PubPeer, which received the institutional award, there was Elizabeth Bick, who's a so-called data sleuth, who's identified over 7,600 potential cases of research misconduct, who received the individual award, and Christopher Schmid, sorry about the pronunciation if I'm wrong there, who's representing Pixel Quality, an initiative of almost 150 researchers that are establishing guidelines for clarity and reproducibility in research images. So yeah, there's this like trend that we can talk about: research misconduct, post publication review. In this case, a framework for reliable research images. But there's this, I think, trend towards recognizing this, the role of the collective, and the mobilizing the community for science. What does the award mean to you and the team at PubPeer? And like, what does that validation mean for PubPeer moving forward as you see it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this award is a real honor. I mean, not just for the site, but also for the users. Having this kind of validation from, a major institution and a panel of internationally known scientists really, I think, validates the user's time and effort that they've spent writing these comments, and hopefully incentivizes, brings to the forefront really the utility, and just being recognized by such a major body shows that there's a utility to this, and that these comments are useful, and hopefully other people see that, and this helps the site grow. So yeah, it's a great honor for us at the site, but I mean, specifically for the users who are producing the content. It's fantastic.
So just quick follow-up there, and I alluded to this question. I don't want to like put you on the spot or anything, but let's talk about in like your ideal scenario as you envision it. What do you see as like the 10, I don't want to put a number on it, but the growth plan? Like what does the forum of PubPeer look like at the, when it's actually reached the end point that you envisioned when you started it?
So we right now have a great base of users who are interested in finding, research misconduct and finding problems with images and spotting, real fundamental problems with data. And that's been great. I mean, it's really useful. But like I said at the beginning, I think that having a broader evaluation of research would make PubPeer even more useful and would have a bigger impact. And so I would love to grow PubPeer to capture more of these journal club type questions where people are discussing, more, finer grain detail of the articles, less fundamental issues like, look, this image is wrong, this person cheated. Because I really think that we grow this body of information, if we can get young researchers interested in anytime they go to a journal club, leave a comment, I think this body of information it's really, going to be welcomed by committees that are evaluating our careers and what research to fund. So, I'd really like to grow that part of it. And so the award is great because, as you mentioned, it's a significant sum of money, 200,000 euros, that we can put directly into the site. And, so, I mean, PubPeer is a really shoestring operation here. Very few people work at PubPeer. We have basically 2 part-time developers, and lawyers, because we have to occasionally defend legal threats. We receive occasional letters. And so using that money, the 200,000 is fantastic for, we can really hire some more people, pay our part-time people to work a little bit more, they can work more hours on it, and really, put that into the site and develop it to hopefully attract some different types of commentary.
Yeah, I want to echo Daylon's congratulations. Such an amazing award. And yeah, it sounds like it's going to be put to excellent use. I want to pull on that thread a little bit around what you see the future value of PubPeer, because it just little aha moment. I was like, yeah, this is the thing that we all have to learn as scientists, is how to think critically and think deeply and connect the dots and say, oh, that publication and now that publication over there. Now this is the story that's starting to weave together with these, disparate kind of research groups coming to like doing similar research or complementary research. That as a trainee is one of the hardest parts of learning how to be a scientist is asking critical questions about the science, not necessarily about the conduct of the science or the presentation of the science, which I agree is we've got to call that out too if it's an issue. But I love that idea of a virtual lab meeting or journal club to really help people develop those critical thinking skills. You mentioned in there that something about ultimately these commentaries and these contributions to science as a part of the conversation might help somebody in their future career. These comments are anonymous, right? People are anonymous on PubPeer, and I think there's probably a good reason that started that way. But can you comment on, is that the way that you would like to continue, and sort of the pluses and minuses around anonymity on chat rooms? We know what anonymity does to people in other forums, so yeah, what's that situation been like?
Yeah, so we were worried about anonymity at the beginning. When we first allowed it, we thought that this could be a problem. But one thing that people don't necessarily realize about PubPeer is that there's a pretty strict moderation level on the site. And so despite comments being anonymous, they all get looked at, and we have some rules by which one has to abide in order to get a comment published on PubPeer. The biggest rule number one is it just has to be based on publicly available information. So you can point at a figure panel, panel B of figure 3, and point out something in that figure that everybody else who has access to that figure can look at, right? And by focusing on the data, we kind of we get rid of a lot of the the possibilities for bad comments that you see on maybe YouTube commentary or other completely anonymous commentary. And two, this gets to Daylon's point about Yelp, it's a different type of comment, right? It's not somebody's opinion on what they didn't like about the waitress at the restaurant they went to. It's look at this figure right here. There's a problem with this figure. And that's, to me, is much more useful information than somebody's kind of just opinion about things. And so by having this moderation layer, we don't necessarily we don't see the problem that we were worried about with anonymity. So right now we receive about 6,000 comments a month on PubPeer, and about 80% of them are anonymous. So that means 20% of them are signed. And there is, you asked, is there some utility in signing a comment? And I think there is. I think that as this body of second layer of assessment grows, I could imagine that if two candidates applied for the same job and had very similar CVs, if one of them had a record of good public assessment and they put that on their CV, I would, as a colleague hiring a new colleague to the lab, I would definitely place value on that. And so I think that there is some value in signing your comments and building up kind of a reputation of somebody who has a critical eye and is helping progress science.
100%. Well, that's what the idea of scientists on Twitter or X, there is a community there of people contributing to science by having actual productive discussions, despite some of the challenges with that platform as well. And yeah, to your point of that second layer of assessment, the flip side of that comment of, there's a problem with figure 2B could also be, hey, I see something in figure 2B that they didn't call out in the text here. I think something else might be going on. And like, it's scientific discovery, we don't always know what our data are showing. And we have to have those conversations around maybe there's something else here. Maybe, I know this other group came up with this result and this seems to validate that result. And so there's that public thing. And I think people should be allowed to tie their name to that, because you're right, that's contributing to the advancement of science. And you want to see that people can do that and are willing to do that. Yeah.
So just to add one other thing, even though comments are anonymous on PubPeer, we do allow the ability to keep your anonymous username. So you can go back, you're anonymous, but you can go back and capture that username and use it over and over again. And so if you wanted to be anonymous, and I think there are really good reasons to be anonymous. I mean, nobody wants the glory of, telling their department chair that there's a problem with one of their articles, right? You can go back and capture these usernames and use them over and over again, and then one day maybe take if you decide at one point that you want to come out from anonymity, you can say, well, look, I was user X here in this on PubPeer.
I mean, you yourself, when you started the PubPeer, were anonymous. Was that just more of like, wow, this is risky? Can you elaborate on why you started anonymously and what ultimately changed your mind on whether to come out with your identity?
Well, yeah, so it was anonymous because I wasn't quite sure how it was going to go. And if it turned out that it was a total disaster of people just arguing about other people not citing them enough, then I didn't necessarily want the credit of that. So, I was anonymous for that reason. And we kept it that way for a while until a few things happened that it eventually made us decide to create a nonprofit association. Eventually this was clearly an endeavor by scientists for scientists. And so we decided to make this a nonprofit. And at the nonprofit, we then came out from anonymity.
Well, it was a brave thing to do, to launch something like this. And I think we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, that the publication, I don't know, apparatus is quite entrenched, and it's entrenched in these big brand names, but it's also entrenched in the way it works with the submission and the, peer review and traditional way of getting something published. And when you're trying to shake that up a little bit, that you're kind of pushing a big boulder up a hill. So it's very, very brave for you to do it.
I thought of one other answer to Daylon's question. So so I didn't want to take the risk of the site being a disaster, but also just hosting the website, just being the person responsible for the website. When I'm not anonymous, there are definitely opportunities for other people who have received comments on the websites to put pressure on me. And this happened at one point in the early days of PubPeer, when I was anonymous. There was somebody who came to review our lab. Our lab gets a 5-year review every 5 years. And one of the people on the external scientific advisory board had a comment on PubPeer. It wasn't a horrible comment, but it would have been if I wasn't anonymous, it would have been an easy opportunity for that person who's reviewing my lab to let me know that they would be happier if that comment wasn't on the website. And so that was also a major motivation for staying anonymous.
What about Richard Smith and George Smith? Have they since revealed their identities? I saw in the article that the other founders.
Those are their real names. So they happen to be anonymous based on how prevalent those two names are, but those are their real names.
That's amazing, because I'm reading, it says two other founders who wish to be known only as Richard Smith and George Smith have not revealed their affiliations. That's the ultimate psych out ever. They wish to only be known by their given names. Wow, that's next level Jedi mind trick. Yeah, I guess it must some lost in translation there with the article, but needless to say, a lot of courage by all three of you. Quickly though, the just in terms of like the vision moving forward, I like your vision. I love your vision, because like, I don't know, the way I see it, and I'm oversimplifying, but like a lot of the whole research misconduct will be made either like impossible, not impossible, but hard to do based on pre-publication apparatus, AI, machine learning, like vetting all the images, et cetera, and or be impossible to detect in a forum. So like I feel like the role of PubPeer as the police, it's gonna outgrow that, I think. And I think that was the idea initially. So I love moving toward that vision, but it's a high bar, right? Because like at once you're kind of restricted. You got your hands tied that you gotta to avoid risk or whatever the liability, it's got to be restricted to the facts, right? And verifiable. That's the image. But like on the other hand, the whole idea of the post publication review is, I guess, this like reframing, which is very subjective, but it could be a collective subjectivity that is real and important. Like, for example, I saw this idea on a forum the other day. It was like they should have an Oscars that happens 10 years after the movies came out. Like if they had Oscars for the movies that were 10 years old, think of how different that would be, right? And so I wonder if they had a similar idea for research publications, how much differently both we would look back on papers that were maybe overvalued, but to, I think, all of our points, which are elevating real innovative science, is to recognize these stories that maybe didn't get enough run in their own time, that history has really shown the value of. But that's tough when you have to be so careful. So how do you kind of balance that kind of the legal, liability risk with the vision of like really being this collective collegial forum for sharing opinions that may be controversial, may be inflammatory? How do you manage that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things to answer in there. One. So I'll get to hopefully all of your questions here, and I think that one of the interesting things that you bring up is, yeah. So PubPeer has been focused on a lot, or the comments on PubPeer have been focused a lot on this kind of misconduct stuff, and the easy misconduct stuff. Like there's an image here, and this image is the same as that image over there, so those two things must be the same. And at some point, we're gonna get it all, right? I mean, I think that with the artificial intelligence, image twin, and other ways of detecting these duplications, eventually we're gonna find it all. And so that would be great, it'd be fantastic. But you're right that this is going to be an arms race. As the artificial intelligence tools for detecting the cheating are getting better, so are the tools for creating the cheating. And so it's constantly going to be an arms race to find, to keep up with this stuff. And the second part of your question, so how do we balance this, the legal aspect of this? Well, we have found that focusing on facts really kind of seals up the legal issue. If people are discussing facts and not opinions, the major legal problem here, or legal risk, is defamation. And if it's a factual discussion, then that is basically, if they're publicly verifiable facts, then this basically removes the defamation argument or line of attack. So we do receive legal threats, and we have to respond to those legal threats. When there is we will get letters from disgruntled authors saying that they're unhappy with a particular comment, and we have to respond to those in order to not expose us any more legally. And every time we respond to those, we pay a lawyer to write a letter to respond to it. And so this major component of the PubPeer budget is legal fees for this sort of thing. I mean, I'll tell you that some of these letters can be very complicated. We have had one instance where, for a single letter, we paid over $20,000 for this one letter. This was a complicated issue because it was between different countries, and we had to have lawyers within different countries. But just responding to one frivolous complaint cost us a huge amount of money.
Wow.
But keeping the discussions focused on the facts really makes it very difficult to bring these complaints.
Yeah. So I want to dig back into this peer review, sort of the publication apparatus thing, because I am always all for something disrupting this very entrenched system that we have that I think is, there's definitely good things and things that work about it, but I think it's broken in many ways. There are people making a lot of money off of it for one thing, but I also thinking from the scientist perspective, and I remember as a trainee thinking to be asked to be a peer reviewer would be the ultimate, like, okay, I've made it. I've got enough publications out there that somebody thinks that I have something to say and I can help get this publication out. And then it started happening and I'd be asked and I was, oh my goodness, so much pressure. Like you don't know who the other peer reviewers are. You don't know everything about what's being asked of you. Sometimes it's coming, the publications I was asked to peer review, I'm like, I am not an expert in this field. And um, I can look at the basic things like sample size and statistical analyses, but I can't dig in any deeper. And so I certainly hope reviewers 2 and 3 are going to be able to look at the things I can't look at, but you don't know, right? And
Absolutely.
I don't think that is good enough. Well, and then there's all these other complexities. Whereas if you're in a field that's quite small, you're probably collaborators in some sense with the people that you're peer reviewing, and there's likely politics in there, and human nature comes into that. So I love the idea of a public peer review, and I love the idea of a long-term peer review, so that, like Daylon says, new things are learned, and do publications stand the test of time? So again, trying to find the question in this, but maybe you just have something to add to that around what the role of PubPeer is in kind of forcing the evolution of the publication apparatus and the peer review part specifically.
Yeah, so I think that this idea, if we can succeed in, as a community, creating this second layer of evaluation, this issue of not being, being sent an article to review and not being an expert on it, this would probably decrease, because you would go out and you would review the stuff that you're interested in, and you would review the part of the paper you're interested in, right? You don't necessarily have to make a overall evaluation of the entire article. You can say, look, I'm an expert in this part right here, and this is my feeling of what I see in this part.
Well, one of the things that I was thinking about, and it comes back to you saying, like, you can choose to sign off on certain things, and maybe ultimately somebody's contribution to this public peer review will pay off for them in the end, if they're the chosen candidate, or they're showing that they're contributing to the community and they have depth of thought and an ability to analyze. And that adds some incentivization to do this. And that's the other part of peer review, is you're not paid to peer review. It's a tight timeline. You have to do it kind of off the side of your desk. And it means, are people going, are they going to do their best at this if that's the case, and especially if they remain anonymous to the entire community. And so putting this system in place that PubPeer does actually provides it's a distant possibility of a payoff, but at least there's something there.
I can guarantee that reviewers are never going to be paid. That's the unfortunate reality there.
I think there's probably downsides to paying them too.
So what do you guys think? I mean, we have played with this idea that I'm probably not supposed to talk about, but I'm going to do it. We've toyed with the idea of having a committee select comments and giving a significant reward or prize to good comments on PubPeer. Like, imagine if you're a young researcher, or even an established researcher with a French salary, if you had a chance of getting, let's say, $1,000 for a good comment, I think you'd probably leave a lot of comments, right? And if you just had to go to Journal Club and listen to the Journal Club and come back and summarize that, And if there's a possibility that that's going to get selected and you're going to get a significant prize for that, that wouldn't cost us a huge amount of money. And with this new award, we could certainly fund quite a few of those. I think it would. I mean, my guess is that people would do it. And like you mentioned, that there are conflicts of interest when paying for reviews, but here it's kind of like a lottery system. We're not paying for every review. I'm not sure this is illegal. I'm not sure we're allowed to do it, but it's something we're definitely going to look into.
That's a great idea. And I don't even think it is about the money. The money is a token that you can say, oh, yeah, I'm doing it. Hey, there's money in it. But really it's the recognition is key there. And not just like, I think as you described earlier, like an actual legitimate, tangible recognition that you can use as an element of your CV in promotion and job seeking, but also, yeah, just like to have the recognition of people you respect and your community to say, yeah, you made a bunch of legit comments. Here, take a bow. And as we're talking about this, I realize that it's so distorted and warped, the big journals and the career element, because truly, and I do believe this, I mean, maybe it sounds ridiculous, but if you married the bioarchive and PubPeer, you could pretty much, I mean, who needs the journals, right? You have data that's new, you put it out there, and then anyone who's interested, they have a look and they tell you whether or not it stands up. And that is, can live on and be provisional or not. That's science and truth. But obviously, we're living in a world where all the other externalities are gonna drive our efforts.
That's true. The other aspects are going to drive that. But one nice thing about this approach is that they can coexist with the other publication methods, right? We do have articles, we do have journals, and we do have the bioarchive, and we have PubPeer. And so I think you're exactly right, and this is one of the goals for PubPeer, is we could just exist with just PubPeer or any evaluation layer and the bioarchive. But scientists aren't going to switch over to that. A lot of these other ideas other ideas for the future of publishing require us to say, okay, we're not doing journals anymore. We're now doing X. But this can coexist for a while, and if it works, it can just be a gradual switch over to that method. There's one thing that the journals do provide, which is not just evaluation, but there is kind of a curation. I mean, I do appreciate having a list of articles presented to me that I might be interested in. And so that's the other thing that would also have to be put in place. We tried this at PubPeer with something called periodicals, which was like, you could think of it as like a Spotify playlist where you could take articles and create your own journal and say, I like these, and put a little commentary. I like these articles. And other people could subscribe to them. And then we could all just, then we have everything. We have the journal also. And everybody could create their own journal of, something really specific or something really broad. And I think so that hasn't really worked. People aren't really using periodicals. But I think something like that is the future, where we the community just takes over everything, the evaluation, the curation, and it can be completely open access by just being posted on the bioarchive. That's my hope for how things eventually go.
Yeah. Well, we can introduce you to Richard Sever if you haven't met already.
Oh, I know Richard. Yeah, I know Richard.
I figured you probably do. I have a few comments. First of all, I think AI is going to solve that third problem for you, and I think that already exists. And I actually had a great conversation with somebody recently. In my pottery studio, actually, who is working for a company that scours its abstracts, because things are behind paywalls still, but makes you basically a customized journal, and then can summarize this in layperson terms, or summarize the key methods, so it's probably going to be some solution like that.
That's a nice solution, but I would also like to know, what a scientist in my field, I'd like to have his selection of articles, like there are some scientists who I really respect, and what are they reading? What What do they recommend I read?
Barack Obama's playlist, that was
Still
banging.
happens. It still happens, Daylon. Yeah, so I have a couple comments. First, I'm going to do a little shameless plug for the science news program that STEMCELL runs. So we have 20 different hand-compiled, person-compiled newsletters that come out in different fields for exactly that, to give you a little bit of a curated view. But I wanted to come back to your idea of paying people for comments, and I think there's something there. The first thing that came to mind was when you said the lab, if somebody from their lab meeting comes forward and says, here's what we found, who gets credit for that? And are there going to be bad actors who are going to scoop people's credits and say, actually, I said that and they wrote it? And so you're gonna kind of open up a bit of a Pandora's box that way. But I think you could probably figure out a way to solve that, which Daylon said, if you're rewarded for your collective contribution, not just your one or two comments, but like this person is a top contributor and overall they're doing a really good thing on here, you probably prevent people from just sort of stealing one idea and putting it out there. And then if you also think about the way the reward happens. So as soon as you'd put cash in there, I think you probably are going to walk into some red tape. But if it's something that's more around like advancing their career, so a scholarship or a travel award or some, conference registration, or we'll pay for your membership to some society or something like that, where you're not just handing them a check. I wonder if that would make it easier for you. But I think you've got something, some sort of, or even if it's like literally a virtual badge that they.
Yes, absolutely. Because look, PubPeer, if this award tells you nothing, it tells you that PubPeer has been elevated to the consciousness where every scientist is aware of it and respects it, right? So if you had a bet, I'm a PubPeer, commenter, I'd take that.
Yep. Yeah. So you've got something you can play with there.
So your idea of a virtual badge is also, I love that idea as well. And that's one thing that we're also considering, is building more of a community aspect to PubPeer. So people can upvote and downvote comments, and build a profile, very much like Stack Exchange or something like that, and kind of build a credit, like build a credit for interacting with other people's comments, but also for their own comments, and get kind of a community feedback from that sort of interaction. I agree with you, that could go a long way in promoting more commentary. If there's a chance that the PubPeer community is going to vote you up and you're going to have like PubPeer status, then that is incentive for writing a comment. And the financial thing, there's an idea that we are kind of kicking around, and I just raised it here to see what you guys thought of it. By no means is this a full plan, but something we've thought about.
Yeah, it's a fun conversation to have. Just where's this going? Because as soon as you talk about upvotes and downvotes, and you start to think about social media algorithms and what shows up and what doesn't show up because of people's interactions. And I think there's good things about that. You can weed out trolls in that way. So
there are good things, but also we would want to, we'd have to do it carefully, because we would want to avoid creating another metric. We wouldn't want the impact factor to be replaced with the PubPeer factor or something like that. So, we'd want it to still be about the commentary. We wouldn't want upvoting and downvoting of articles, but maybe comments would be okay.
Such a good point. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, I actually read it on Wikipedia, but it was cited that 21% of articles that are flagged on PubPeer are eventually addressed by the journal in some way. So I thought, I was kind of chewing on that stat, and I was like, on one hand, that's significant. You're making a significant difference to the scientific record. On the other hand, that's a fifth of the articles. Is that high enough? Like, if something's flagged, shouldn't it be addressed? So I'm just curious, is that a number you think about, or is that just an artifact that you're like, it can go whatever way it wants to go?
I don't know where that number comes from. I don't think that's ours, but I don't necessarily know it's wrong. But one thing to keep in mind, to me also, it seems like a high number. Yet as you say, it's only 20% of all comments, but all comments are not necessarily negative or even pointing out something that needs to be corrected, right? There are other types of comments on there. So I'm not quite sure what that number is or who calculated that, but my partner at PubPeer, Boris Barber, who's another CNRS researcher here in Paris, and a colleague, partner here at PubPeer, and one of my best friends. And he did an analysis recently where he looked at all retracted articles and the dates of their retractions and the percentage of those that had comments on PubPeer before they were retracted. And he found that 18% of articles that are retracted have a prior comment on PubPeer, which to me feels like a pretty significant number. 18% of retractions, and I think it was the last 5 years, have a prior PubPeer comment. It's, the user's comments are doing something. And we have to find better ways of publicizing that to give the users more credit for their, credit and show that their comments are doing something. We're not great. Hopefully this podcast will help with that. We're not great at showing how their efforts are paying off.
Well, the podcast may help, but I think that award will go a long way, both with the visibility as well as the actual money there attached. But look, I mean, we talk about all these ideas, and it's going to be tough to navigate, I'm sure, and there's going to be a lot of false starts. But the key is you have the framework, right? And you have the affirmation that the framework is functioning, as you just said. Right, the comments are there, and they're moving the needle. They're making change in the actual scientific community. So it's clearly a win. Just to finish up here and close, I mean, we could do another whole interview about your actual science in the lab, and we're not going to be able to encapsulate that in a single answer, so we won't. But I do want to, again, circle back to the idea of this podcast, Lab Coats in Life, which is about mentorship. It is about this new scientific landscape and the trainees and how they can best succeed. So as someone who does run your own lab and does have trainees and, understands all the vicissitudes of the academic science, as well as this whole other element that we've been talking about, what is your... I don't know about advice, but how do you guide the research, but also just the scientist? How do you create a scientist in your lab to fit this new landscape that you've had a large part in creating?
So for me, attending journal clubs was really a fundamental education for me in being a scientist. And I highly encourage that. Just find a journal club and participate in the journal club. It's intimidating at first when you're a more junior scientist, and you're kind of in awe at how or I was in awe at how the more senior scientists took things from this article that I read that I hadn't taken at all, and saw the problems and saw the benefits of that. And it really helped me read articles and also, just critically assess, not take everything, like we said at the beginning, as absolute fact because it's published in Nature. Having a critical sense for reading the data and assessing and observing how the more seasoned scientists do that was really useful, and I really encourage that. And then, of course, afterwards, put the comments on PubPeer.
Love it. I love it. I love journal clubs because of exactly what you said. When you start, you're like, how do these people do this? How do they understand these articles? I don't even understand the language. So it gives you some practice at doing that, but it also, I can't explain it, but it showed me over time that those people were not that different from me, because they would show up to the journal club and I'd realize over time that they were asking the same questions over and over again, or they were finding the same fault in every paper, or I don't know. I think imposter syndrome is such a problem for scientists. And when you spend more time around scientists and interacting with them, you realize we're all just people trying our best and kind of figuring things out, and nobody knows how to do it perfectly. So I think the more you can interact, the better. And that's another thing journal clubs offer. So.
Just a bit of advice to any trainees listening, not for nothing, but if you got journal club scheduled, go on a PubPeer and check out. You might have some brilliant kernels that you could contribute to the conversation. Sound really smart.
Or listen to the Stem Cell podcast or the Immunology podcast and bring the insights there. Use all three, and you'll sound like a smart one when you show up to your journal club. All right, Brendan, that brings us to the end of our show. So I just want to extend so much gratitude to you, not only for joining us today, but also for doing what you do. I know you do it above and beyond your day job as a full-time researcher, and I really appreciate and the risk and the bravery, like I mentioned earlier, around building something that goes against the grain, and it's worked and it's making a difference. So thank you on behalf of all of us at Lab Coats and Life, as well as the scientific community.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate that, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our show. Don't forget to sign up for our email list at www.labcoatsandlifepodcast.com to get show notes, episode summaries, and links to useful information, or learn more about STEM mentorship via the resources found at www.stemcell.com/labcoatsandlife. You can also reach out to us on X via STEMCELL, so at STEMCELL Tech, or by email at info@labcoatsandlifepodcast.com with feedback or to suggest guests.